Esther is a book where things just happen. No God is ever mentioned, so clearly the author wants us to think of all the events that occur as perfectly normal, natural, plausible, unguided chain of events. In other words, a book of things that just happened. Finally, a book of scripture that doesn't get all in our face about God. After all, some things just happen, right? Like this story. Once upon a time, there was a mighty kingdom called Persia, ruled by a mighty king named Xerxes. Well, maybe not so mighty. In truth, he had one big talent, planning and implementing massive parties and getting really, really drunk. So that's where the story opens. Xerxes is throwing a big 6-month-long party. Anyway, at the end of the party, he throws an after party for a few hundred of his closest friends. This after party lasts 7 days, and scripture says at the end of it he was in high spirits. I bet. When he calls for his wife to show her off to a bunch of drunk men, she refuses. I wonder why. So he fires her and decides to get a new queen. He decides to bring beautiful virgins from all over his kingdom, hundreds of them, and whoever pleases him the most after 12 months of trying will become his bride. Yep, King Xerxes invented the Bachelor reality show. Now there was an orphan girl named Esther who had been adopted by her older cousin Mordecai. She happened to be very beautiful. And it just happened that she was chosen by the king's men to be one of the bachelor contestants. And then it just happened that after 12 months, the king chose her to be his queen. Mordecai found himself hanging around outside the gates of the palace to keep an eye on Esther, and it just happened that while there he overheard 2 men plotting to kill the king. Mordecai reported it. The 2 men were executed by Xerxes' favorite method, impaling them on a large stake in the ground for everyone to see. Ew. So Xerxes continued to party, Esther began her reign as queen, and Mordecai continued to hang out at the gates. Then Xerxes did what any foolish, extremely powerful king does. He hired Haman. He hires an evil, delusional, megalomaniacal psychopath to be his most trusted advisor. Of course. Well, every time Haman goes in and out the gates, he expects to be honored, bowed to, fawned over, but Mordecai refuses. This makes Haman so mad that he decides to use his power to kill Mordecai. But when he finds out that Mordecai is a Jew, he does what every megalomaniacal psychopath does when insulted. He decides to eliminate not just Mordecai, but the entire Jewish race. Makes sense, right? Well, it just so happens that while Mordecai seems to announce his Jewishness at the drop of a hat, he had encouraged Esther to hide hers, and so neither Haman nor the king are aware of her Jewish heritage or connection to Mordecai, and so the plot thickens. So Haman, being persuasive, manages to persuade a drunk Xerxes, being very persuadable, that killing an entire race of people is a good idea. Xerxes, not willing to be distracted from his party planning, simply turns over the car, as it were, to Haman to let him drive wherever he wishes, which in this case is over as many Jews as possible. Haman could have, at this moment, simply commandeered the king's army and proceeded with his dastardly plan. But like any good supervillain, he decides to overcomplicate matters, randomly selecting a day for execution by casting lots, and then ordering it to be open season on Jews on this day, chosen by the lots. So the decree is set forward, encouraging anti-Semites everywhere to annihilate the Jews on a given day and forbidding the Jews from legally fighting back. As soon as the decree was made, the king and Haman sat down to have a drink. But the people were bewildered. When Mordecai sees the decree, he goes into deep mourning. Esther hears of his mourning and asks him to stop. Mordecai realizes that Esther is unaware from her position of the major policy decision, which to all appearances Xerxes has completely forgotten he okayed. Mordecai asks Esther to help, but she pleads with him that she is not in favor with the king as she once was. He has not sought her company for 30 days, and if she intrudes upon his presence without being invited, she could be executed. To which Mordecai responds that we're all going to be executed. Actually, without mentioning God at all, he says that salvation will come from the Jews from another place, but that she may not survive. He further goes on to say that perhaps it is for this reason that she is in the position she's in. Apparently no one told him this was supposed to be a story with no purpose, plan, or design, where things just happen. What is all this talk about destiny and position and purpose? Well, anyway, Esther decides to approach the king, and he happens to be in a good mood. So she, being a smart lady, tells the king she'd love to have a dinner party with him and Haman. That night, she and Haman and the king meet for dinner and drinks. At this party, Xerxes is clearly feeling good and offers her half his kingdom, apparently not the half belonging to Haman. Instead, she asks the king to return for another party the next night. Why wait another night? Well, it turns out it's a good thing she did. It just so happens the night is filled with amazing coincidences and crazy random happenstances. Haman leaves the party feeling great, important, and affirmed. After all, he had dinner with the 2 most important people in the kingdom. Just him and them. But then he sees Mordecai on his way home. Mordecai, who still refuses to acknowledge how great Haman is, and he becomes furious. He restrains himself from killing Mordecai right there and instead goes home to complain to his wife and friends about how great he is and how terrible Mordecai ruins everything with his unwillingness to acknowledge it. Boo-hoo! They suggest to him that he build the world's largest stake upon which to impale Mordecai. 75 feet tall. 75 feet! I think we can literally call that overkill. Haman loves the idea and begins right then in the middle of the night to build this large stake in the middle of the square. The next verse says that Xerxes couldn't sleep. I wonder why not. Could it be because someone is building a mammoth death machine right outside his window? Anyway, he can't sleep, so he decides to have someone read to him, and he just happens to have them read to him of his castle's history. Probably he wanted to hear of his own exploits. Instead, the reader just happens to choose the very moment when Mordecai saves the king from the assassins. Xerxes is intrigued and asks, did we reward this man? It just so happens they did not. Xerxes thinks they should have done something, maybe a small party. He asks his servant, is anyone in the courtyard? He wants to send someone to honor Mordecai right now, early in the morning. It just so happens that the someone in the palace is Haman, who has completed his project and has come to ask the king for permission to execute Mordecai. Normally a simple request, but he's unaware that Xerxes is right this minute looking for a way to honor Haman's intended target. When Haman enters, the king asks him, what can be done to the king the man wants to honor? Well, of course, Haman assumes the king can only mean Haman himself, so he asks for everything that he himself wants to be honored. Put him on your best horse, dress him in your fine clothing, and have someone lead him through the town proclaiming how great is the man you want to honor. Xerxes thinks this is a wonderful idea and says to Haman, go, do this very thing for Mordecai. Mordecai. Haman is mortified, but needs to obey. No doubt all the while he's doing this thing for Mordecai, he's consoling himself at the impending doom of Mordecai, and the fact that he's still going to dinner tonight with the king and queen. Oh yeah, the dinner. So that night at the dinner, Esther tells the king that someone wants to kill all her people, the Jews, and Xerxes, of the short memory on the long flagon, says he is astounded that anyone would do such a thing and to let him know who, and he will take care of it. Esther reveals it is Haman. Xerxes is so upset he storms out of the room. Haman throws himself on the queen to beg for mercies when Xerxes just happens to return and sees him molesting the queen, or so he thinks. Xerxes roars in frustration, looking around for some suitable way to execute Haman, which is when a servant in the palace says, "Ah, there's a huge stake right outside Haman's house. We could just execute him on that." And so the villain is executed. Mordecai is raised to Haman's position. Queen Esther is the hero. The Jews are given permission and arms to fight back. They win the day, and following Xerxes' example, turn the whole thing into a party, and all of it just happened.